Slice of life is a genre that gained big popularity following lockdown, which makes sense when most good slice of life shows are about a small group or community coming together to take part in life together, the opposite of quarantine's entirety. But there's some hidden aspects to the genre, the way it tells its stories, and the way it compels you to want a happier life, and how it can capture such authentic feelings. Often it does this through hobbies, interests, and sometimes even work lives. Today, what I want to talk about are some of the stories that focus around arts and hobbies, things I'm fairly familiar with. We'll be talking in a general sense about a few anime and manga and then zero in on 3 specific ones. Blue Period, Dressup Darling, Goodbye Eri, and Look Back. I know that was 4, we'll get there. With each being a slice of life about forms of art or interest in creating. What I want to talk about in them, though, is not just how nice they look or even how good the story is or is not, but how they bring a sense of magic and imagination into the real world. Because that's something I appreciate about the slice of life genre. No matter if you're going camping, taking a work break, falling in love, or making cosplay, the genre appreciates that you are living. The things that you do, the way you live, have a value to them. Slice of life takes a lot of time to nurture its atmosphere and character relationships. If you've been watching anime over the last few years, a great example of this is Eurocamp. In each episode, the places the characters are present are just as important as the bond being formed there. In episode 5, for example, Rina and Deshko go on separate trips, but share their day through messaging all the way into the night. This tone-setting moment encapsulates this feeling of location and bond, where Rina and Deshko viewed the city from different ends, but still managed to connect with each other. The scene defines what the purpose of each outing is. It serves to showcase their appreciation for where they currently are, which is the same place together, no matter what. Everything is part of the story. Just experiencing what life throws at you are all important to a slice of life story, whether it's a small moment of success, a quiet morning outdoors, or a bit of work at an aquarium. No time is too slow, no action too small. It all gives value to your time. Sports anime are probably the example of this. Everyone knows and understands some amount. Practice time, team conflicts, and each match mean the world to the characters' lives, even though it's a sport they may not pursue after they graduate. Because no matter what, it's still a major part of their life. It shouldn't hold any less value just because they may not be good at it or they don't want to pursue it as an adult. It's still nonetheless important to the life they've lived. A slice of life is called that because, well, that's what the genre is about. It's about the fact that we are getting a slice of how these people live. The only thing I'd say would personally disqualify a show from being slice of life is if the story focuses on a greater pursuit than simply living life. I think there are some fantasy adventure stories out there that are in their own unique ways slice of life stories, but because their overarching narratives tend to be beyond the goals of this is just how each day is, a lot of them don't make the final cut for me. Romance stories can also fall into this difference too, where they get too far from being about the characters' lives as they are and the moments that bring them closer together, and more about the tropes and gimmicks that make for a dramatic and flourishing romance. Slice of life, though, carries its weight best when it gets interested in how a community and characters find themselves in their lives. Shows like DIY, White Aquatope on the Sand, and Eurocamp most obviously showcase this important aspect of slice of life through locations. Having a space to come together can impact not just a couple friends, but sometimes a community. Community is most important in this case because of the shared sense of place and knowledge that we were there. In most slice of life, this is a type of commonplace like a sports gym or classroom or cafe. In these shows, like Eurocamp, where the activities are based around going camping, that place is more than a location. It's the very reason people come together. White Aquatope is similarly location-based, but in its case, the aquarium is a place where people find comfort and memory in being. It holds a lot of interest for the local community who's grown up with it, and in turn means a lot to the main character who finds a place there. She learns a lot of things she otherwise wouldn't, and the people there accept her into the space when she needs somewhere to go away from the stress of her life. A commonplace in slice of life, even when it's a subgenre, allows characters realizations they wouldn't normally be aware of to begin with, since it's the experiences in those places that etch themselves into the characters. Due to the medium of manga and anime, the artist can express not just actions, but emotions and thoughts. You can see the form of their ambitions. You can see the way they envision their actions. It's easiest to understand in sports anime and manga. You see this training, the way they carry themselves, how their demeanor changes going into a match. But this isn't unique to sports manga. There's ways that arts and comics can make a moment more momentous by bringing you visually into the deeper thoughts of the character. Blue Period is an example of something rather mundane that gets expressed twice as deeply once you understand the thoughts of those doing the work. You can't see the change someone goes through mentally, the knowledge they take in, and the way they think and see things. But Blue Period is an example of how a medium like comics, or stories in general, can make you understand the complexities of learning a new skill. If you've been unable to pick up on why Blue Period is so interesting, it's possible you're looking at it expecting it to be more like a sports manga. You can clearly see the changes and betterment of the skills, but in the end, a lot of the changes that happen to the characters come from the way they change their thinking, not just work. The story of Blue Period follows Yaguchi Yatora, a cavalier, a high school student who views learning and achieving excellent grades like he's gaining stat points for a video game. He's aloof in that sense, holding priority in his own feelings of what he should be doing. And that's the main character you're introduced to. From the start, Blue Period does its best to set the expectations that you've probably had the same thought as Yaguchi. What's so great about Picasso? I could paint that. And that's the crux of the argument. That's something so thoughtless. Anyone can do it with just a few flicks. But in actual cases, we learn that art is a skill, just like anything else. And as you learn to conceptually improve, you also visibly improve. So what's the flip side of that argument? I'm too old to learn that. Art takes so much time, which is both incorrect, but also true. You're not too old to be able to start making art, or even learning it. But art does take time. It's finding your subject, planning your piece, all the way down to the medium you use, and then the actual execution of the piece. There's a lot that goes into art and its creation. Yaguchi's first piece is a great example of this. He thinks a lot more than he realizes about the subject of his piece, Shibuya. He realizes that he likes the freshness of the morning where it turns all blue. He even comments on it to a friend when they're there. And while the friend doesn't see it quite the same, Yaguchi moves on to use it as his piece. He gets there by talking with his teacher and other artists who explain to him the work and thought that they put into their art. In just a day, he takes the time to understand and try and share what he sees in that blue Shibuya. He struggles to get the blue correct. He can't quite figure out the angle. It's not exactly what he wanted it to look like. Yet, when it's on display and his friends see it, they recognize it. They finally see that blue Shibuya, just as Yaguchi did. To which he even expresses with tears in his eyes that for the first time, it feels like he's really having a conversation with others. And it's just the first step for him. If you're just watching the anime, you have missed out on a lot of explanation on how art concepts play into learning art. But for the majority of his time, Yaguchi learns a lot about various techniques and mediums and how they affect art in a completed project. But if he had never started drawing in the first place, if he didn't say, hey, maybe I'll take this a little seriously, then he might not have even considered art. At a later point, when Yaguchi is in college, he has an assignment that brings him back to the subject of Shibuya. After a few fumbles with previous assignments and not wanting to totally overstep his current skills, he settles for a draft piece within his skill set using Legos. The big step forward is not executing the perfect idea for the assignment, but recognizing what his skill set can accomplish for his goals. It takes a lot of time for people to admit that they struggle with a subject or work that they aren't used to doing. That growth can be important, especially in art, where people are looking to see your work and not an imitation of your work. There are changes that he doesn't vocalize, or even think about too, that we as readers may not even connect until we see other characters' reactions to his change. When his thought process spins off, or when he develops something that feels like a natural progression, we don't have to wonder how he got there because we were alongside him as it happened. I love that one scene where Yaguchi and his other friend, they meet up and like they don't talk about the blue Shibuya thing, but like they do, you know? It's like they both realize what a moment that was for Yaguchi's life. I love that. It's so good. The first time I realized the changes that were genuinely occurring in my art was nearly a year after I tried actually working on studying rather than just drawing. I still drew as much as I could, or even wanted to, but there was this attempt I made at trying to really try something with my work that I wasn't used to, or even sure that I liked. Somehow everything started to feel wrong. Yet when I stopped and took the time to reflect on that work, with these new skills I'd gained, it opened a lot of avenues for me. I learned how to use oils, watercolors, and improved my line work. I may not have liked everything that I'd done, but it was impossible to say I hadn't improved. It's still not the end of Yaguchi's story by any means. We as a reader see the stress and learning that goes into Yaguchi's development in art. We learn how he begins to process concepts and ideas into his art, either through sheer emotion or technical force. Through visual language, we can see what he imagines and what he wants to make or capture in his art, even if it doesn't look like the final piece. You feel the importance of the moment and it draws you in. There's a whole lot to be said about how a story can not only entertain, but broaden your horizon in its entirety. Ooh. Wait, I actually kind of gave myself chills. That's crazy. Let's talk about Dressup Darling. Dressup Darling is really good. A girl meets boy, and she pulls him into her cosplay hobby. There's a lot of character depth in the way the characters interact that I really love and enjoy in general. It feels both relatable and entirely unique to the characters' relationships. In its initial setup, not the part where Marin smashes her head against Gojo's desk, but later, Marin reveals her interest in cosplay, asking for his assistance. They connect over this earnest effort she's made to try it herself, only to really hook us with the reveal that her first cosplay, this one she's trying so hard to do, is of an eroge character. At Marin's age, I too was introduced to eroge through a certain blue-haired anime man. So hearing the way she talked about the characters, or even the topic in of itself, wasn't surprising to me. It's not something that is technically supposed to happen, as Gojo points out in the story. The games are age-restricted, but it happens in our modern age with how accessible things are. That ultimately doesn't stop Gojo from still wanting to help Marin, though. The big factor in both characters' appeal is the difference in communities they come from. Gojo's skills come from an extremely niche place. His time working on Hina dolls has given him a lot of work with fabrics, makeup, and crafting on a day-to-day basis, but it's also harder to connect with as opposed to something like cosplay and otaku culture, which Marin is well ingrained in. When you dress up as a character, there's an aspect of that interest that is automatically expressed. You like that character and want to show that. Gojo, our protagonist, showcased an important aspect, though, of having such a niche interest: the amount of work that goes directly into pursuing passions. Ultimately, too, that's kind of what the series is about: how people with passions interact with the things they love and find a community with each other. Gojo works incredibly hard on just about everything he does. On top of assisting his grandfather making hundreds of Hina dolls per day, he takes the time to help Marin out with her cosplays, go to school, and make time to hang out at conventions or events. Gojo has a deep passion for handcrafts, and you feel that in the way he pushes himself in making art. He worries about accuracy, and when he makes a mistake, he takes that into account the next time he makes something. He doesn't decide it was never worth the time in the first place. He makes notes and improves upon it. A lot of his character comes from this knowledge-driven perspective. If he doesn't know how something works, or if he needs to find more references, he takes time to try it out and do research. But he's not like that the whole time. Part of this comes from meeting Marin. When an artist is making something they truly care about, they usually take care in that presentation and do the work to understand and showcase their perspective. Otherwise, even if they're the greatest artist in the world, it means nothing it means nothing. Trying to just do what you want and slap on a meaning after usually doesn't work either. You have to understand what you want to make conceptually first. Have a perspective you want to share or capture. Surprisingly though, as passionate as Gojo is, he's burdened by feelings he's had since he was younger, only for Marin to give him the push he needs to fully express that passion. His driving force becomes her smile, happiness, and passion for cosplay. At a young age, Gojo is hurt by someone he once viewed as a close friend, whom he decided to share his specific interest in Hinadels with. She didn't share his passion and found it creepy, though we later come to understand it was much deeper than that, which made Gojo a recluse through his school life until Marin's extroverted, carefree nature took his life by the wheel and drove him in the direction of working harder for both her and himself, as all of his self-improvements originate from his love for her. And this is where we see something that slice-of-life stories are a bit more fit to showcase than your standard romance or even a drama. One of Gojo's greatest developments over the course of time, at least in the manga, is learning to be more selfish with his feelings, expressing them, and then being willing to take and share his interests. The nice thing as well about his character is that he always has an interest in Hina dolls. For him, it's second nature. Rather than being turned away from it when his friend rejects it, he simply kept it to himself because it ultimately brought him happiness, and he didn't want to lose that. He clung to it not just for himself though, but for the sake of his grandfather. Even though Gojo kept his passion to himself, he never did stop growing. When you get attached to a hobby, especially arts, where a major thing you enjoy about it is usually the process, in part or whole, then it can be really hard to give up. A disheartening thing for Gojo is that he felt his work was unacceptable for quite some time. He found it hard to connect with others until meeting Marin, and his interest being rejected is something that he hardly ever gets into a dialogue with himself about. Often, if he does, it's a question if his work will live up to outside expectations. But it's Marin who reminds him why he agreed to set down this path in the first place. And while I'd say Gojo never questions his love for working on Hina dolls, he does question why he finds himself so in love with it. When I was younger, I became very into music and playing instruments because my grandfather practically lived and breathed music. It left a big impact on me when I was seeing him every week and he'd show me his drum set or play some music. As years went by though, I asked myself if it was the music that I loved or if it was the time I got to spend with him. In the end, it was a bit of both. I got to see my grandfather and understand the way he expressed himself. And from that, I took on my own appreciation for it. In some ways, I think it's similar for Gojo, where with Hina dolls and costuming, he finds the connection with his grandfather and his own interest in it to align. That expression of beauty is something that he's drawn to, and in many ways, the thing he loves most about what he does. I think his connection with Marin really helps him understand that being able to show something really beautiful that has a lot of work put into it means a lot to him. What he loved about his grandfather's work was partially the work he saw go into it. He knew how hard his grandfather worked, how much time he spent, the detail and care put into it, and recognized that all of that work finalized was beautiful. In working with Marin, Gojo got to experience a part of the process he likely didn't consider: the happiness of those who see his work. Being that he was once told his happiness in seeing all of that effort was gross, it wouldn't be surprising if he doesn't engage with it outside of the work itself. So seeing Marin get into the cosplays he makes, acting as the characters and embodying his work and being happy with it was a really big part of him understanding that he loves this art. Now let's go over Marin. Most particular, I want to talk about how manga portrays Marin as an otaku. She falls in love with the story she reads. And while a big focus seems to be on fan service with her to some readers, I can't help but notice how opposite to that. She gets portrayed sometimes too. She celebrates her favorite characters' birthdays. She loves talking about the story, even if it's inappropriate at times. She's cringe, and yet she doesn't care. With a lot of cringe culture and such getting pushed back these days, it doesn't surprise me that what was a fairly cute aspect and enduring idea when the manga initially released has become something most people have come to dislike. She's extremely earnest and truthful about her love of media, anime, and games, and so is understandably upset when others try to put those interests down. That's a lot of what you'll find in the anime community, though. People who just want to share in the fun of talking about the shows they love. Yes, there are people who will make it about power scales or quality, but there's just as many people that want to honestly engage with these stories in a positive way. While Marin is maybe a little more invested in media than those around her, she has a very simple relationship with portrayals of those media. She believes in everyone's ability to cosplay. She never talks about how someone should never try something. She's only ever enthusiastic to see the things people are choosing to do themselves. I think part of that is her own understanding of how cosplay and modeling works. A lot of her time and attitude about cosplay is how she can become the character, embody them and such. It's not about playing to the camera or how she advertised herself as a cosplayer. As we learn, she has simply forgotten to make her socials public at all. It's all about the honest love she has for being able to become that character. Although it's not cosplay, I also love indulging in making fan work. This video is probably a great example of that. But fan art and just getting to draw something I love feels good. It doesn't have to go further than that. And even though I share my art, it isn't about that part. It's getting to create and set a scene with familiarity, see something new and something old, or capture the things that hold my attention. I think that's why Marin is a good reflection of the anime community at the end of the day. She represents that desire in ourselves to be an active participant in sharing the things we love, even if only for ourselves. I think that's why Gojo is the protagonist, though. Marin has this charisma and air that she's built to draw people in, but it's ultimately more fun to be a viewer of someone like that. If you had a protagonist that got everything they set out for, were incredible in what they did, and ultimately only had the flaw of being cringe, that would be your shonen hero of the early 2010s. No shade meant for that. I really like fairy tale. If that tells you anything. The protagonist being Gojo allows Marin to still be good at what she does, but also allows to see it from the view of those around her, who find the natural awe in it. Marin's biggest revelation only comes in being able to connect with Gojo. By being opposites, but with the same thoughts of their respective interests, there's this relief for both of them at the end of the day. Marin's comes from finally being able to get a connection she ultimately does get from her friends in her interest in cosplay and such. Gojo's comes from the understanding that he isn't alone in the mindset and love of beautiful things. There's overall a larger part of the story that feels better because Marin is there. Both halves are necessary for a fulfilling story, and whose eyes you see it through still plays a good part of it. We get to really understand why the story is more than a romance because of this setup. The reason I want to talk about Dressup Darling at this length is because I also want to mention how masterfully it lulls you in with its varying genre elements. A clean and lovely art style, all to make a slice of life story about cosplay and community. All the characters get to present aspects of themselves, parts of their story that say something deeper than a romance or ballad of drama. They get to be people at the end of the day, trying to express and connect with through a hobby they work on with their own hands. It's something they use to transform themselves into what they see in the media they love. I find that to be such a unique storytelling choice that works best shown in slice of life. That's what I really love about Dressup Darling when all is said and done. A trigger warning moving forward. If a story can broaden your ideas of how to think, if a story can capture the complicated feeling of finding community in a hobby, then it can also capture the complicated feeling that comes with loss. A lot of popular slice of life go over this topic a lot. KyoAni is a studio that made some incredible anime surrounding this theme. However, I want to talk about one creator who seems to have a very large interest in capturing grief as not just a shocking aspect of story, but to really explore the way people think about loss in such different ways. Chainsaw Man and Fire Punch heavily explore this theme, though where Fire Punch, led by protagonist Agni, is motivated by the very loss of his sister and town. Chainsaw Man shows how a world can be affected by loss, and the many reactions that come from that. Look Back and Goodbye Eri are the most concise and easy to pick up examples of this. Look Back's use of genre and theme are easiest to understand, and break down well into the slice of life use of everyday events. Sometimes we make friends by sharing interests, and those friendships can leave an impact in our pursuits for the rest of our lives. Look Back's most poignant point is how we react to the loss of those people, especially in cases that can be traumatic or that we feel we somehow caused, or where we feel we've left things unsaid. In this case, the two main characters, Fujino and Kiyomoto, who grew up working together to make manga, go separate ways after arguing what they want to do with their future opportunities and work. One day on the news, we see that the art school Kiyomoto has attended was attacked, and we find out she was one of the victims. In the wake of the funeral, we see the thoughts and grief Fujino goes through in revisiting their first meeting place. The story bends its genre here to play with the thought, what if we'd never met? What if I had been there? We see the thoughts incarnated with some time travel aspects, where the characters grow up again, but this time having never met until the day of the attack, where Kiyomoto is directly saved by Fujino. But we understand this is not the reality of the situation at the end, when Fujino finally enters the room and turns to see the Hanten that their friend had always worn. Look Back really wears down aspects of the larger slice of life genre down to pieces it needs to make the story it wants to. The focus is different from the use of slice of life in Blue Period, which gives a lot of developing and learning perspectives of art. But it's also different from something like KyoAni's use or other general slice of lives, which give very broad lifestyles and then zone in on particular aspects as needed. The story of Look Back asks its reader to read out the exact plot and all its monotony. It wants to convey and not overinvest their time in seeing general life aspects. It's cut and dry, building on its previous panels to make montages of time passing, but not neglecting the fact that we're seeing the characters' lives go by, and how that can contain significance in of itself. Yet it gives enough emotion and understanding to convey and connect with the reader on a deeper level to talk about grief. There's a part of the cycle of grief called dialogue and bargaining, where more than anything, you want to talk about the lost loved one with others and search for more ways to explain this loss to oneself. This manga's conclusion is representative of that stage, where Fujino asks, "What if I never made you come out of your room?" In another way, I have expressed this stage in a small way just in this video. I told a little story about my grandfather, who passed away over 2 years ago. I still very often ask myself, what if I had kept up with music? Was he worried about me? More than that, though, I ask, what if I had done more to be around him? Towards the end of his life, I wasn't able to see him as much, as he couldn't really make the trips he had made every year to visit us. I always try to open the dialogue with myself, though, and remind myself that I like music because I had an awesome grandfather who introduced me to it in all its variety and expression. Even after we moved, I got to see him for almost 3 months each year, and for almost 10 years. I'm lucky enough to have recorded music of him, so I can never truly forget his raspy voice or the enthusiasm with which he spoke. Even for Fujino, while the only person she truly felt connected to was gone, she was able to find a dialogue that made her understand what Kiyomoto meant to her, and use that to accept and continue her pursuit to make the stories she knew Kiyomoto loved. Another perspective of loss Fujimoto has done is Goodbye Eri. What the story revolves around is actually recordings of one man's life and all of the loss he's experienced in it. In some ways, the story feels a lot like reading the things you hear Fujimoto talking about through interviews. He loves making movie references. He likes a girl who can be rude and harsh to him, that kind of stuff. Most of all, I think the way he likes a bit of fantasy in the everyday story stands out as most similar. Goodbye Eri feels like a lot of summarization of Fujimoto's themes and work more than its own standalone piece. He has a very specific paneling in this one that lays out everything to very purposefully have a single progression and reading, while also being like looking through a phone screen, which the main character uses to primarily record. There's a purpose and editorial side to show that chronological progression of the movie that only breaks form a few times to showcase the impact of even little revelations. He doesn't beat around the bush with his thesis and simply lays it out through his dialogue, but is playful with how he says it nonetheless. In just the first 20 pages, we see a full-fledged story of a boy earnestly trying to capture his final days with his mother, but in the end, being unable to. But the story continues and recites the same story again, this time instead with Eri. Goodbye Eri, similarly to Look Back, ends with a fantasy of what could have been true. She'd been a vampire and couldn't really die. The movie he'd made could always be there for her to become that version of herself again. Although we know that movie was not all there was. There's a very clear final indication that he'd cut out all the ugly parts of her and made an almost perfect immortalization of her. But in the end, the most honest part of the story comes from that fear of saying goodbye. At least for me it is. I know exactly what it feels like to be too scared of having to say goodbye, and then also feeling the regret of not being able to. There's a consistent lingering fear in the story where we know we, through the eyes of the protagonist, will be saying goodbye to the people who help shape our lives. This means that, along with their loss, we'll lose what they added to us. Eri becomes a person that we come to understand through a single lens, but the story admits that directly to us. Eri's place in the story becomes less of that of fear to confront and more of the side that shows how we grow in spite of the looming fears. Sometimes we don't just outright confront our fears, but grow to meet and understand them. Even at the end of Eri, I think that there is one conclusion that I see as comforting for my own feelings. At the end of the book, when Eri is a vampire, it must be so nice to be able to say goodbye. I think about my grandpa, and even though I know it was more than 2 years ago that he passed, it really feels like yesterday. I can remember exactly what I was doing when I found out, and exactly the day I had after. I remember going to his memorial nearly a year after, and yet still that feels like yesterday. There's this strange inability to not think about his passing, like the way the protagonist can't stop thinking about the film throughout the last portion of the story. It's something that I may feel for years, that I'll always be able to turn around and be able to see as clear as the day it happened. But at least in that case, it means I'll be able to say goodbye when I'm truly ready to. So, while neither is exactly a slice of life, because of how much they bend its genre through a metaphor of an immortalization or an alternative timeline, it does treat itself like one in order to tell the story it wants. Fujimoto's use of expectations and humor within such a dark subject adding to this, allowing to the reader to feel that sense of how life flows between ups and downs, all to be thrown in an alternative, almost hopeful fantasy. Not to mention that everything I talked about with Dressup Darling and Blue Period applies here. There's a sense of found community and being able to see the change in the characters' mentalities through the medium of a comic that you just don't get other places or even in other genres. When I talk about how slice of life can bring a sense of imagination and magic to the real world, Works like these two are what I'm talking about. You can tell a fairly real story and have some aspects that are exaggerated. You can feel and understand that when a slice of life story does something unexpected or unrealistic, but not something so far gone that it makes the story feel fake, that's really unique. That's something I like about slice of life's usage. Even in stories that have something unbelievable, you can still get a story that feels fairly real. Just like I see parts of myself in these stories, you probably see yourself too. Maybe you're not an artist, but you struggle to convey yourself to others like Yaguchi. Maybe you're not a cosplayer or crafter, but have a close friend over similar skills or feelings you share, like Gojo or Marin. Or maybe you've learned from regrets and gained some new outlook on what the things you do mean to you, like in Fujimoto's works. There's a lot of things in Slice of Life you can probably connect to in that regard. And that's the fun thing about reading or watching these stories. Honestly, you've probably felt it in more than Slice of Life. Frieren is a standout story that captures people's attention for how its adventure also tells a lot about Frieren's own exploration of life after significant loss. Dramas like Pluto recognize their ever-increasing pressures of power and war that technology's advancements place on those not in power. Slice of life, at the end of the day, is not simply boring everyday life. It's a genre that allows creators to choose something with a wider range for their storytelling. When a creator decides settings and characters or designs for their story, it's not just something that they perfectly imagined or were told by their editor to do. They spend time considering what those various elements allow them to say in that story. When you read that work, spend time with those characters, and come to the realization that you viewed someone else's life even just a bit, that is where you find out what Slice of Life is all about. We feel the impact of all these stories because at the end of the day, it's not just the truth in Slice of Life. It's the truth in everything. Hello again, and thank you for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed. I have several credits to give, so let's get on with it. I used 3 different music sources for this video. They were all for free. I think I paid for a couple of them as like a tip, but they are from It's Coffee Run, E.G. Fantasia, and Hunter Milo. The thumbnail was done by the incredible Lines in Motion, Danny. The 3 backgrounds that are more detailed, with real dynamic lighting and all of that, were all done by Abril Zanassi. They are available for commission on VGen. This is technically my debut video. Hello. Hi, how are you? And my design was done by the incredible Bunny Shadeow. In means of technical stuff, the script editing was done by Fally from over at the Fally Zone. I had a lot of support from them and Tessa, the VTuber manager. Both of them were really helpful in helping me get this video off the ground at all. I don't think it would exist if those two were not around to help me. Tessa also connected me with Shinon, who did all of my audio setup. I have moved rooms since we've done it, so it probably still sounded kind of off, but it wouldn't have sounded as good as it did without them. So I really appreciate that as well. Everyone's links will be found down below. If you want to commission them, lots of them are on VGen. Some of them don't have commissions open. Some of them are on Ko-fi. Like some of the music is available there for purchase, and others are just available for free. But make sure that you're giving credit when you're using it. This video was a long time coming. It took about a year from the moment I started the script to today. A little over a year almost, because I remember working on it in October of last year. Last year, as in 2023. um, and in that time, a lot has changed actually with these series. Blue Period got a live action announcement. So did Dressup Darling. The Look Back movie came out. Dude, I kid you not, when I heard that Look Back was announced for a movie in the time that I was writing this, I was like, I'm a prophet. So I'm happy to see all of this happen. I'm really happy that I finally got this video done. It was obviously very personal if you watched it all the way through, which I appreciate you doing because it was very personal. So if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe. Hopefully the next one won't take quite as long, but I don't want to jinx it. I've already written several scripts in various degrees of unfinished states, so we'll see how it goes. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again soon. I hope you have a good day, whether it's tomorrow or today. And goodbye.